Wow, we are hyped up in the chat already tonight. Happy April. Welcome to MAUI Community Standup, April 2024. We got a good one for you today, folks, as Steve Harvey, host of Family Feud, would say. Good, right? Thank you. Big party here. We have ex-MAUI, I don't know, but current MAUI funfluencer, Brandon Minnick here to talk a little bit about his new MAUI course. So he's going to kick us off today. And then we have Jon to talk about some slim bindings. And then, of course, we have our resident YouTube celebrity, James Montemagno Jr. We have Gerald here. 62K YouTube followers or something.
Yeah. Just no beard.
No beard, right. And so he's going to spend some time talking about App Center and all that and UI testing and a bunch of things. So Dave and I are actually going to mostly shut up this episode, which I think is good for us. Right, Dave?
And everyone celebrated.
Yeah. Claps. And we're just going to roll with it. Gerald was kind enough to provide some of his favorite blogs of the month for me to put in so you can read them on your own time. And the rest of the links will all be in the link that I just popped into the chat. Keep the chat open. I know Jon wants to have more of a discussion than a demo situation. So start getting your complaints about bindings out. You know, thinking about
that was just more of an excuse for why I didn't have a presentation.
That's fine. That's totally fine. But yeah, I guess if this is your first community stand-up, this is sort of how they roll. They're always fun. Usually they're a bit more structured, but you know, we always have people on talking about things, which is good. So yeah, Brandon, you want to kick it off? You want to introduce yourself and tell us what on earth you're doing, and I'll figure out how to do a layout that works.
I'd love to. Thanks, Maddy. So, hi everybody, Brandon Minnick here, and for those of you who haven't met me yet, I was a former Xamarin employee. Worked at Xamarin through the Microsoft acquisition. Stayed at Microsoft for I think 7 years, and now currently work at AWS as a .NET developer advocate, but I still do a ton of .NET MAUI stuff, still give a lot of .NET MAUI talks, conferences all around the world, and still lead the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit. So please join us. We have our .NET MAUI Community Toolkit stand-up in 2 hours on the .NET Foundation YouTube channel. But yeah, today I wanted to share a .NET MAUI course that I made. I made it for, there's a platform, Dometrain.com. If you haven't heard of that, it's owned by the amazing Nick Chapsis. And he asked me if I'd be interested in putting together a course focusing on .NET MAUI. So my goal here was I wanted to create the course that I wish I had when I first started learning, well, Xamarin back in the day, but now .NET MAUI. And so there's actually two courses here. We have our .NET MAUI Getting Started, and in here is where if you're a C# developer and let's say you just joined a team that does .NET MAUI, this will teach you all the basics. So we cover just, what is .NET MAUI, how to get started with it, layouts, padding, margins, XAML. We even do a whole course on XAML.
Minutes on XAML.
So yeah, I start up. Like I said, I still run or lead the community toolkit team, and part of the community toolkit we have community toolkit.maui.markup, which is a C# UI library. So in the beginning, very selfishly, we install all the community toolkit libraries: community toolkit.maui, community toolkit.maui.markup, community toolkit.mvvm. And yeah, I kick it off showing just how to do things. Thanks, George. Do it for the people, right? Give the people what they want. Give them some XAML. But yeah, no, I actually kick it off with just doing things in C# because it can be a little jarring if you've never done XAML before to jump into something new. And yeah, in the XAML course, we basically port everything over from C# to XAML. And then yeah, we keep going. We cover everything you'll need to know all the basics for .NET MAUI, so you can join a team, start contributing code right away. And then we have a deep dive course where we go real deep into things, specifically focused on .NET MAUI. So obviously creating custom .NET MAUI controls using handlers. This is a very common .NET MAUI thing. In this example, I used actually our teammate, because Gerald's on the community toolkit team too, Vlad created this amazing blog post, walkthrough, sample where he created calendar view, and he graciously let me use that in the course. And here, basically, we show that in .NET MAUI, you can do anything. There's nothing holding you back. You've got all the APIs from iOS, Android, Mac Catalyst, Windows at your disposal. So if there's something that doesn't exist in the .NET MAUI library, if it exists in iOS or if it exists in Android, you can still use it. So we create a calendar view here, show you how to do that this new modern way with .NET MAUI handlers. We talk about memory management and how you can avoid memory leaks and how to understand garbage collection and circular references and iDisposables. We go deep into async await. That's kind of a pet project of mine on the side. I've always loved going deep into the internals of the .NET runtime. And
hey, Brandon, you only spent 36 minutes on async await in this session. You had to spend at least an hour teaching it to me.
That's true. That was fun. No, so actually, Nick's asked me if I want to create a whole async await course for Dometrain. So it'd be hours on async await. But yeah, so cover async await, how to follow the best practices in your .NET MAUI apps, how to integrate with REST APIs using libraries like Refit and the new Microsoft Resilience library, which will automatically retry API calls if they fail, which is super important in mobile apps because we can't trust the internet, right? Like people are constantly switching cell phone towers between Wi-Fi and cellular. They might be on a bus. So all these best practices here and how to do it in your .NET MAUI app, like local storage, using GraphQL APIs, unit testing, manual testing. So this is everything you need to be a proficient .NET MAUI developer. So most of us watching the stand-up today probably already know .NET MAUI, but if you have somebody new joining your team, or maybe you're a team leader or running a company where you have to get people trained up on .NET MAUI, highly recommend this course because, like I said, this is everything you'll need to be that proficient .NET MAUI developer. And it's really what I wish existed when I first started learning Xamarin and .NET MAUI back in the day. All in one place, all here for you on Dometrain.com.
Cool. Thanks, Brandon. I mean, this is awesome. obviously we have our free Microsoft Learn class, right? So for those of you who don't want to dish out money, that's an option. But this is like super deep dive. This is a real training thing that you can go to your bosses and be like, please pay for me to do this real training. So that's always nice. And Brandon is great at explaining things and has explained plenty of things to me over my years struggling through Maui. So
thanks, man.
Yeah,
it's almost 11 hours. So
that's pretty good.
And I don't blame folks for pushing back because yes, Dometrain charges money for it. I also put a lot of time into this. I spent my whole December, January working on this just for you guys. But yeah, you get 11 hours of content, and that's just the video time. All the code's included too. So you've got tons and tons of value here, even though it might be a bit more than a free YouTube video. This is everything you need, and maybe everything you didn't even know you needed, all in one place to optimize your .NET MAUI apps and help you all become the great .NET MAUI developers that we know you are.
So curated. Love it. All right. Well, thanks, Brandon. We'll let you go back to your job. But if you're going to miss Brandon, he will be back in a little bit under 2 hours, like he said on the .NET Foundation channel. And if you need something to do to kill the time between the hours, there will be another stand-up where Gerald and Shane, who's in the chat, are going to go over community PRs. So you get 3
and Matthew.
hours.
And Matthew too.
Oh, and Matthew. Matthew's joining?
Yeah.
Where's
Yes.
Matthew? What the heck?
It's not 11 hours, but it's 3 times 1 hour, so it's something.
So yeah, 3 hours of Maui live streaming chaos today. Brandon, you said .NET Foundation YouTube, right? That's where to go.
Yep, .NET Foundation. And if anybody hasn't seen the new release, we just pushed out version 8.0 and 8.0.1 today. That's hot off the presses. So we'll be talking all about it, what's new in it, how to use the new snack bar implementation on Windows. We released touch behavior in the community toolkit. So huge release, lots of bug fixes for pop-up that we'll be talking about. So come join us. Yeah, it's noon, 12 p.m. Pacific time on the .NET Foundation YouTube channel.
Love it. Thanks, Brandon. See you in a couple hours.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. And then there were 4.
Is this like
You
an
just keep
elimination
picking
thing?
people
or-
out.
Yeah.
Who's
And
next?
you're next.
Oh,
Just start popping off the stack.
Yeah.
He was mentioning that new release of the community toolkit, and I have been building an app, and so I am trying to rely on good components, and I find that most of the things that I've needed have been in the community toolkit. Whether it's pop-ups, like he just mentioned. I also am using the Toast. It's been really useful. I absolutely love it, and even beyond that, so many plugins now out there on NuGet. I have in between that and Copilot, I don't know that I'm writing much code these days. I feel like I'm just like an orchestra conductor and letting the ecosystem build my app for me. So. But you know what? There are some things like, I don't know, Firebase native SDKs
what's
that I personally, like I've tried to do a binding. I have successfully done a binding, but it was, like a decade ago. And if somebody was asking me to go do a binding right now, I would absolutely say no. It is a headache. Even though I have written a fair share of Java and Objective-C and .NET, I would not want to do it. And guess what we've learned? We've learned that not many of you want to do it either. So the question is, who's going to do it? In the past, Xamarin did it for a lot of things. And Jon, you led that team, right? For years and years.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've done a lot of bindings. Bindings are near and dear to my heart. Or I don't know. It's kind of like MS Build. Is it like, do I love it or am I held captive by it? I don't know. Who knows at this point? But yeah, I don't want to do them either. Like I went back to try and do one just to see and kind of compare, like, how bad is it to write this thing again from scratch? And it took me a while to get back going on it because I hadn't done it in a while. So it's even if you know pretty well how to do it, it's not that easy if you don't do it often.
Yeah, it's not. And I think the main benefit of a binding And for those who may not know what we're talking about, essentially you can think of it as gluing .NET to the native platform, right? The native language. So you've got some component over here, a library, a framework written in Objective-C, Swift, Java, Kotlin, whatever it happens to be, C, C++, I guess, as well, right? But you want to be able to use it from .NET, and you don't want to have to write Objective-C, Swift, blah, 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 blah. So what a binding does is it creates that contract between those two libraries, and it does the invocation of those APIs, as well as, translates objects and data types, right? And then puts that together for you in a very easy to consume NuGet package assembly on the .NET side. And you really don't have to ever see that stuff on the other side. But as we've kind of already said here, it's a lot of work, and maintaining it from a time-consuming standpoint, but also, especially for libraries like the Google Firebase, Google Play services, etc., they're changing so frequently, and there's so much API surface to it that it can be daunting. Facebook is another example. Mapbox is something that has come up pretty frequently. Stripe is another library that we hear about occasionally. Then there's also, SDKs for bespoke, hardware devices, whether it's medical devices that we hear about, it's sensors, it's OCR scanners or printers or Bluetooth, this, that, and the other. So what do? How can we make this easier for everybody? The binding thing is important. We need to have some way for you to use these libraries in .NET, but do we need to replicate the entire API surface area when you really only need to use one or two APIs? How can we make all of this stuff easier? And so, Jon, introduce us to Slim Bindings and tell us why this is our savior.
Yeah,
I'm now being a product manager and overselling.
So this is nothing new, first of all, which is kind of the fun part of it. It's something that I went back and was looking for. I'm like, I know I did some talks, or I had some like other repos or materials back from a while ago. And I did put a link in the README of the repo that we'll talk about in a minute, back to a talk that I did on Online One. It was like in 2020 or something. And this is where I first started kind of thinking about the approach of how can we do this differently so that we can help other people help themselves, for a number of reasons that you already mentioned. For one, there's just a ton of libraries. Like, it's not a scalable thing for us to be able to go out and say, any library you want, we're going to write bindings and maintain them for it. And then the other part of it is kind of looking at the different skill sets involved. So like I said, going back to do a binding, if it's not something that I do day in and day out, it's really not that easy to remember. It's a very, very niche specific set of skills and knowledge that are required. And at the end of the day, like, that's not where most people are investing their time and energy in learning those skills. So like, can we look at this from a different viewpoint? And that's where the concept of Slim Bindings came from, where, the idea is basically, in a nutshell, I want to use the native tool chain, the native editors, so like Xcode, Android Studio, and I want to build my own basically API surface that I'm going to actually expose to my app. And we'll get to a few reasons of like why we're doing that exactly. But when we talk about using the native IDEs and tool chains, part of the win there is, if you're going to look at implementing like Facebook SDK or Firebase SDKs, where do you start? You start in the documentation that Google or Facebook provides, right? And their documentation is how to do this in Swift, how to do this in Java or Kotlin or Objective-C or whatever. It's how to do this with the native languages, with the native editors. For the first step of getting how do I install the SDK? So I go out and I get Facebook. How do I do that, right? If you're looking at from a Xamarin or a MAUI.NET binding perspective, you have to go figure out how to get that thing and all of its dependency chain that, comes along with it, right? For iOS, that's sometimes not that bad because they're kind of mostly contained in like one set of packages or something. For Android, it can be really, really bad. Like Mapbox is always a sample I go back to, because it's like, first of all, one, they have like a custom Maven feed. And so I don't even know how to download those without Android Studio to begin with. So it's easier just to kind of step back, go through the documentation and the samples and the getting started guides from the vendor that offers that SDK, which is going to tell you how to do that in the native IDE. And from that, like, even though I'm not a Java developer, I'm not a Swift developer, I can mostly stumble through those getting started guides, right? Like, it's not that difficult of code. I can often copy and paste some of their samples and stuff into my own project, into my own Xcode project, let's say, and reasonably kind of do something that I want to do with that SDK. And so this whole concept of slim bindings really focuses on trying to make that whole part of the setup process the easiest thing to do. And so we're using, the focus of creating that layer. And
Does he want to rename it? Is that what's happening here?
We talked about that. So yeah, like slim is kind of a, I don't know, a weird name for it, but that was the term I used years ago. And so it just kind of stuck since then.
Whose screen is this? Oh, it's David's.
It's me. Yeah, I accidentally logged in with the admin thing or whatever.
Good. That's fine.
Yeah.
So while you're talking, maybe it would be good to do a tour here because I think that's a good introduction.
Yep.
People generally now hopefully understand why it exists and generally the approach. It's just a simplification of the whole thing. So we have a repo. Right. And you've put this together, Alan.
You got to fast forward a step to the newer repo. We moved this out to a different name one just because it was easier to do that.
So
it's actually like .NET.Platform .bindings.
It's in the URL list.
It is in the URL list.
There you go.
Thank you. Yes. So this is a public open repo.
Yep.
And will it live here forever, John?
I don't think so. I think that the goal is to move this into a more, not owned by me community space, because the ultimate goal here is we want the community to help out and maintain it and really drive, what we put into this, right? Just like the community toolkit for MAUI or for, MVVM, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I think we would like to consider putting this into that org, the community toolkit org. I don't think that we've gotten very far in having that conversation with anybody but ourselves. Mm-hmm. But it seems to me to be a really good place for it to exist. So what is in this repo? What I see is that you've got some Facebook, you've got Firebase, Mac iOS things, and I think the reason that you've got the Mac iOS stuff here, I'm playing a little bit naive, I know why it's here, is because the Android bindings for the Google Play services and Firebase side of things is up to date. And it's a good, well-oiled machine that our team is able to keep up with for the most part. And so that's not really a concern. It's really the iOS side that is rather out of date, many versions behind. And so how can we help you developers that don't want to get deep into bindings use the modern versions of these things? And as new releases come out from Google, quickly adopt them without blocking on us. Like, we want to get out of the way, basically, by providing you with a solid engineering pattern that is repeatable and that you can confidently own. We know that even full bindings, a lot of engineering teams can't confidently own them for all the reasons we've already stated. So what is in here is you've got an analytics binding and a messaging binding. You've got the native bit here, which is going to have your Xcode stuff in here, right? If I get down into it, you get down into it.
No, go into it, because this is kind of interesting to kind of look at how it fits together too, right? So if you go to the messaging one, if you go into that folder, so this is just an Xcode project. If you go into the MAUI Firebase messaging folder, not the Xcode project folder, because they like to make things look like files even though they're folders, and go to the Swift file. This is the part where we are talking about like creating that wrapper API, that slim API, that focused API, and the real goal here is for you to be able to come in here and create a simplified abstraction over the actual implementation of the native SDK, and that simplified abstraction. There's a part in the README on the front page that hopefully people actually see, But the key here is to use all of the types that we already know about in .NET. And so like in .NET iOS, we know about NS errors. We know about, I think farther up there was a NS data, right, for the APNS token. We know how to do callbacks. We know all of those different things. And what happens with this is binding APIs that are really simple and use types that we know about, our tooling is pretty good at, actually. It's really the more advanced cases with like tons of different inheritance, different subclassing of everything along the line, where it's like, oh, if I want to use this method, it returns this type, and that type subclass is this one, and that one refers to the, right? It's this whole spaghetti chain that we're trying to avoid by creating this abstraction. And so the goal here is, if you look at that API definition, I think this one, and the other part of this is, community maintained. So Alan Ritchie has been helping me build some of these up. We've got more planned. So I think he massaged this one a little bit by hand, but in theory, like I can just throw that Swift project at Objective Sharpie, and it's going to dump this out for me, and it's going to work. There might be like one or two minor touch-ups, but generally it's going to work.
Yeah. So for those who are unaware of what Objective Sharpie is, it is a tool utility that our iOS binding team uses to read the native stuff and generate an API definition, right? It does more than that, but that's the easy bit that you're describing. And so with a little bit of work, we feel like it's not even like an 80% solution. It's like a 99.999% solution for that step.
Yeah. And that may change in the future too, right? Like I know there's efforts in runtime, and this is all happening in the public repos too, that they're trying to figure out, how to make Swift interop better. So at some point in the future, like we might be able to do more about making this automated completely. Like on the Android side of things, it generally just works without any modifications or interventions, right? And that's kind of the story for Android bindings in general, mostly because like the stuff that Java compiles into is easier to, parse in a consistent way and make those decisions about how to map that to C#.
Right.
And I saw the question about async. I'm not going to get into the weeds here, but like async is basically a way to have the C# generated code with that callback parameter look more like a nice, task returning method, and make it look more like a nice async method. So there are some extra things, and I think Alan added those bits in as well.
Okay. So I don't want to steal all of Gerald's time.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, please, everybody, go look at this repo, read the README. It's a lot to read. You could ask Copilot to summarize it for you. That's a really good use of Copilot. So if you are one that needs to use the latest Firebase and you want to use it now, so there is a binding here, right? And it's got the basics, and if not the core stuff that you need. I think some of the API inspiration, John, you said came from one of the plugins that is out there.
Yeah, like Alan with Shiny, he's basically made the API do what he needs to do for his plugin to work, right?
Yeah. So there is a sample project here, and if you look at the sample project, look at the CS proj, I noticed that we have a bundle resource, which you probably, if you're doing Firebase, already have this, right? Mm-hmm. This is not a new thing. You've got project references then to the different binding projects you need. So clone the repo, make sure the solution builds for the particular binding that's in here that you need to use. Create the project reference in your own project to that thing. Or if you are a aficionado of the NuGets, you could build your own NuGet. Yep. We are not distributing a NuGet at this time. This project
link,
is not.
Reference the assemblies that you build from it to, whatever you want to do.
Reference the assemblies. Yeah. It's basic .NET stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like this is not new stuff. And then you've got a couple of custom entitlements in here. And then I noticed up in the platforms iOS. Oh gosh, why do you keep scrolling? That's where the Google Services info plist is. Again, that's standard stuff. But then in the app delegate, this is where the wiring up of the typical Firebase things happens. And at this point, you're using, where is it? Well, I guess this is the native
Yeah.
handling of notifications and authorizations, right?
Yeah, and these samples are, very, very early, very kind of like, hey, does it compile against the API, work in progress kind of thing. There's more work to do here. That's certainly something that we want to see happen. Same with like the Firebase SDKs that are included. There's only the couple of them. Mostly we wanted to establish the right pattern before we started. Like the hard part now we've done, the easier part is like, oh, let's add in the other Firebase things, right?
Yeah, yeah. And so this is the main page XAML CS where you're exercising, you're using those types and things that you have created the binding for, right? We're essentially using the binding here. So I think this is obviously awesome because it's not a lot of code relative to the full binding. It is also a pattern that, like you said, it's something you look back on and it's something that has been around. But as we have showed this to some customers and companies that we work closely with, I've heard several times, well, yeah, we're using a slim binding. We actually already do this.
Yeah.
And so it's not like we've invented something radical. We're really just codifying a pattern that customers have already found useful in production before, and we're saying, hey, this is a good solution for this category of libraries, and the power is all in the developer's hands. You don't need to message Dave every 5 minutes anymore for how do I use these things.
And honestly, the hardest part with a lot of these is getting kind of the initial thing set up, right? So that's the goal, is like, let's try and help make that pattern available to everyone, because every library can be slightly different. Firebase, we're using Swift Package Manager. Google Cast is using like an SDK zip download, and figuring out how to do the linking and all that stuff. That's the hard part. So let's try and enable these patterns, and so that when you go, I need to use this library, hopefully there's something in here for you that you can start with and build on top of, and that hard part's done for you.
Yeah. I love that. There's been a lot of additions to this doc even since I last looked at it last night.
Yeah. And when you look at the whole thing altogether, like at the end of the day, if you kind of step back, it's like, it's really not that bad of a setup. Like why haven't we been doing this more and sooner?
Yeah. Awesome. So as you look at it, you have questions, you find issues. I would say probably file an issue here on this repo. Probably not going to open discussions here. If you want to open a discussion on the MAUI repo, that probably would be okay. If that's a better way to have a conversation about this. But certainly let us know how you get on with it and how we can help. Cool. Thanks, Jon. Appreciate it. So glad to get this out there and into people's hands.
Yeah,
and the other thing that I hear so often from customers, how do I test my app? I'm having trouble testing this part of my app or holding it in this way and testing it this way. MAUI is so different from Xamarin. Is it really that different, Gerald?
No, not really. But I think the thing that throws people off is like the kind of like multi-headed project versus single project, at least for like the unit testing stuff. And of course, App Center may be going away. Maybe that's a thing. So yeah, I think we're going to talk about like when you're hearing things, is it like more about unit testing? Is it more about UI testing? Is it more about other testing? What are you hearing, Dave?
Yeah, so it's across the board, and it's usually just a general confusion. But I think the multi-project thing is definitely an issue. I definitely see some folks trying to probably test things they don't need to be testing. But like, okay, I'm in a project and I want to be able to test some platform specific thing, and they can't get it to build or compile or whatever.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, I'm just going to bring up my screen myself because no one else is going to do it, and I have to control.
Well, I was waiting for you to tell me to. Sorry.
While you were talking, I was just reading my own blog post here, which I quickly wanted to mention because this is something important too. It has nothing to do with testing, but the Apple Privacy Manifest stuff. You probably heard about it. You probably, if you're releasing apps for iOS, you're probably getting warning emails by now, like, "Hey, you didn't do the thing." Definitely go check out this link because you have to do this. All the important things are happening on May 1, 2024. Xamarin Forms, Xamarin goes out of support, and Apple is enforcing this privacy manifest stuff. If you don't have it, you cannot release any updates to your app, so make sure that you get it. We got it under control. This shows you how to do it for .NET MAUI, .NET for iOS, Xamarin even, so you should be good to go. Okay, that's a small plug on this one. Otherwise, yeah, I was just going to show you actually like three ways to test things. One thing that I definitely see as well is like with the unit testing, I get that question a lot as well. And I think what is at play here is definitely the thing where we had like the multi-headed project with like, you know, where you would have your shared project with where you would want to have all your code, right? I'm talking Xamarin Forms right now, and then you would have like the all the projects for all the different platforms that you want to go to, right? And that makes it easy to kind of like write unit tests for that shared project thingy if that's what you want. Because that still kind of like targets like the regular .NET stuff, and all the platform specific stuff would be in your iOS and Android and Windows projects, right? So, you know, that's kind of like how it went now. But now you can still do multi-headed projects if you want to, but we kind of like, you know, promoted the single projects right now. And people were trying to, you know, just add their unit test project to that thing, hook it up, and then it would give all kinds of like cryptic error messages with like, I don't know what this is, which makes sense. So if that is a good idea to do, yes or no, I'll get back to that in a little bit, I guess. But it's definitely possible. So I created a video on this a long time ago already, 2 years, you can see it, and 2 hours ago, because I updated it to .NET 8. But this works for NUnit as well. I did it with XUnit because that seems slightly more popular, but NUnit, basically all the things. And what it does, actually, let me pull up VS Code. That's probably more useful at this point, where I loaded this project. And what you would see happening, this is without the changes. So here I have my kind of like my solution, and this is my MAUI XUnitTestSample. So this is just a regular .NET MAUI app. Platforms folder, resources, all the things are there. I can run it. Actually, let's do that right now. Let me pull up like iOS device, one that's already running. And if I run that, I will see the cool, oh, is it actually the old template? It might be the old template with the little .NET bot coming up, and we should be good to go. So while that's loading on my iOS simulator, what people then would do is like, hey, I'm just going to do right click, add new project. It's not that easy in VS Code, but everything that you see here, you can also do on VS Code on Windows or Visual Studio on Windows. I just didn't have a Windows machine ready to go for this right now. That's why I'm showing it on macOS. But I just added this new XUnit unit test project. I didn't even change a thing, right? It's not even about the test that I want to write here. It's just about the fact that it wouldn't even find my MAUI and actually run the tests. It wouldn't even compile, basically. So my iOS simulator is coming up, which is actually the wrong one, but it doesn't matter for these type of tests. That's important for the UI test, not this one. So then you would make a reference, and then you would start doing your tests, right? So you would make a reference to your .NET MAUI project, and you would be good to go. But now, if you would do, so I'm pulling up a terminal here. I have my files. I go to my unit test project, and I say, hey, .NET test. It's not going to work. It's going to give me an error. And like I said, it's a bit cryptic because it's going to say, hey, I cannot find a target that I want to run with this. All kinds of red, and then people start to panic, not even reading anymore. Just put this in Google or ChatGPT and let it figure it out. But if you actually read it, then you will see like, hey, project MAUI XUnitTestSample. So that's my .NET MAUI project. Is not compatible with .NET 8. And now you have to know a little bit about this. And if you read a little bit further, like it does support .NET 8 Android, .NET 8, or sorry, not .NET iOS, .NET MauixCatalyst. So that refers back to kind of like your target platforms. And here in our unit test project, in our CS project, we can see target framework .NET 8.0, right? Unit test project typically just uses .NET 8.0, nothing fancy, just needs the thing. But for .NET MAUI, we have all these fancy target frameworks, right? We have targets for Android, for iOS, for MauixCatalyst. Now, back to Xamarin Forms world, those targets would be separated out over different projects, and your shared code would be .NET 8, right? So that would just be the .NET 8 thing. You could hook up your unit test, and you were good to go. Not anymore. So, but you can still do it, right? So if you really want to, again, I'll get to if this is something that you should want to do. But if you do want to do it, then you can just add the net8.0 target here, right? I have that in a little comment. It's all in the sample repo that we will link probably in the URL list. You can add that one, but it doesn't stop there, because if you have done that, if you figured out that, whoops, and you're going to build again, it's going to give you another cryptic thing, right? It's going to say something like, cannot find a main entry point, blah, 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 blah. I think it was something like that. Oh, there we go. Program does not contain a static main method suitable for an entry target point. Ooh, I don't know, right? And what that means is that by default, this output type for a .NET MAUI app is going to be an exe. I should actually be referring to this one. While usually the unit tests are looking for a DLL, right, where all the things are in. So what you want to do as well is like, hey, if my target framework, so I'm just going to comment in this one and this one out, add this little condition like, hey, if we're building for net8, which the unit test project is doing, it's basically, your unit test project is going to build your .NET MAUI app and is going to try run the tests on that. It's going to discover the test and it's going to run it. So if we're doing that for net8, because that's what the unit test project is going to use, then we're not going to do this output type exe, and then by default it will be a library, right, a DLL file. And now we should be able to actually run the thing. I hope I'm still making sense. It's a little bit cryptic like this, but if you start playing around with it yourself, then you will figure it out. I don't know why it keeps flipping back. Maddy, this is a bug in .NET MAUI extension. I don't know. See?
Probably not the MAUI extension.
Let's
say dev kit.
Okay, VS dev kit. Anyone but us, basically. That's it. So now it runs, right? So now we have this thing. And then also, and that this is something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend, like if you want to access .NET MAUI APIs, you would have to use MAUI inside of your unit test project as well. But I guess this is like a point where I should say like, hey, is this something that you should want to do? I don't know. You would probably want to separate out the things that you really want to unit test into a separate library by itself, and then unit test that, right? If you really want to test your .NET MAUI app, then you're probably going to look into like UI test kind of stuff, or integration tests, or whatever you want to do. And also, I think you kind of like started with that, David. Like, you don't really want to test our stuff, right? Like we're doing that. So it's not, you should be using our APIs and running tests on that basically, and see if that behaves correctly. We have a ton of tests running for that. So you only want to test your stuff. So what would be better is to, have a separate project, let that reference your .NET MAUI app and have all your important logic that you want to unit test right there. And then it will also be very much easier to hook up the unit test project to that and let your tests run that way. Okay. Are you still with me? You've been very quiet.
I am.
Okay, good. Then I'll just continue until you go offline, or maybe even I'll continue because I didn't notice. So when you have all that, then what people usually like, we added this net8 thing, but by doing that, you do not have access to platform-specific stuff, right? So then you will be like, oh, I need to test this specific thing for Android or for iOS or for Windows, and now you're in trouble because we only have the net8 target in our unit test. So I cannot access in my unit test here like UI kit dot whatever. Again, not something that you probably want to do, but who am I to tell you how to test? So if you want to go into kind of like that territory, there is like a thing that Matthew wrote up about also like the types of tests. So basically what I'm talking about here. So then you have the plain unit tests, which is basically what I explained to you just now. And you also have like on-device testing that you can also use for the unit test that I just showed you. But this is also very useful for your platform-specific tests, because this will allow you to actually run tests on the actual device. So that will make it also, more closer to a realistic scenario where you're actually testing the things, because it's running on an actual, well, usually a simulator or an emulator. You can do it on an actual device if that's what you want. And you have all these device runners and cool things. There's not enough time to show you all this. I didn't make a video on this yet. I might just do it because I'm way into testing by now. But this is pretty cool stuff. And if you run into like, oh, I don't know how to do this, we've been using this stuff like in the .NET MAUI repo since forever. So if you are like, hey, how do I do this thing? Then you probably can just go to our repo, which is a big code base. But if you know your way around it, so first, it's super interesting to actually do that. Second, we do a lot of the stuff that we put out there as well, right? Like we are kind of like in the same boat with all of this. We have to test our stuff as well, and we need to figure out sometimes how to do it just like you, basically. So this works with like a bunch of different things, and actually it's a little bit hard to get to this because we have a couple of areas in our code base like this one, which we built a couple of tools which were super helpful for ourselves, but could also be super helpful for people out there. So I think Matthew actually did it in this repository, and be aware, this is not Microsoft official. This is basically just us trying to share these things out, but not really having the burden of super maintaining everything all the time. So we put this out in the community for you to use. But yeah, this is there. So we abstracted that code from the .NET MAUI code base. And now you can use that as well. Hopefully that's kind of like super useful. I'm putting the link in the chat right here. And if we were to look at, like, I think I opened something here from our own repo, actually. So if we go to like see the .NET MAUI repo, I just cloned github.com/.net/MAUI, the whole thing. There's a lot here. But if you go look at it, then it's kind of like we follow the same pattern for a lot of things. So here's like all the folders where all the magic is like source, SRC, and then we divide it up in Blazor WebView, compatibility, controls, and then under that you will see, well, it varies a little bit, but you'll see docs, samples, SRC, so the actual source for this bit, and then tests, right? And then we have all the different types of tests. So we have the unit tests, and we also have the device tests. And whenever you see device tests, that's the thing that we actually run on the devices. So if I would pull that up, let me see if I actually set this controls.device tests, which is going to run on my iPhone 15 Pro, which is fine, and select debugger. Then this is actually going to launch an app on my device because it's going to run on the device. It will have a nice kind of like piece of UI that will actually show us all the tests that it got through reflection, the way that the unit testing works as well. Basically, it is unit testing, and it will list it out, and you can go through them one by one. You can apply filters. You can just do the failed ones. You can get the full stack traces and whatnot. This is running it manually, but you can also run it in an automated fashion. So again, this is something that we do for all of our PRs, daily, nightly, whatever, any time of day, we run these tests. So we have that running in CI pipelines as well, and you can take all of that and use that for your own apps too. So now we have two simulators because they kind of like multiply. I don't know how that works. The control tests come up here. Hopefully, it seems like it's deploying. So that's something that you can use as well. And then you can kind of like, leverage all the things. I think you can even use this also for UI testing, but I'll get to that in a minute. There we go. See, we have this kind of like cool test runner. You can hook up multiple test assemblies in here. So if you want to run your test in multiple assemblies, typically I think it's going to be only one, but you can have multiples in here. You could go into one of them and kind of like drill down, and here you would see like all the tests that we have. I can click one, and that means like, hey, run it. You can actually see a little kind of like artifact here in the UI, because this has to spawn a little bit of UI to actually run the test. And you can see, hey, this succeeds, and I do the next one. Hey, this succeeds. And you can go through all of them. I can filter them. There's probably one that has to do with a button as well. And you will get all the button test rights here. And you can click it, and you can say, hey, it's a success. I can copy the stack trace or the message whenever something goes wrong. You can filter on all these things. And this is kind of like something that you get for free. I think Alan in the chat, Alan Ritchie, that was mentioned before, also kind of like abstracted. That's kind of like the downside of not having something official here. He kind of like took that same code and he packaged it in some shape or form as well. So there's multiple options out there, but they kind of like all do the same. So this is a very good option here as well. I see Morton in the chat is saying, I love how the test runner UI is originating from MS Test X. Yes, this stuff has been running for a while. So, we like to say then it's like proven technology, and it's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
So
Solid foundation, that kind of stuff.
Morton was saying, you have to run it on a device, which is true. But then he did.
So you have to click each one of those to get it to run. Does that mean like before release day, like for 2 days, you're just
Yeah,
like
that's what
sitting
we
there
do.
in your
Yep,
armchair?
yep.
How does
Yeah,
this happen? And how long does it
that's
take?
that's how I pretend to be busy. I just go by them one by one. Wouldn't miss one. No, so here you have like run all tests, right? So I could just click them all. You can see it actually, like, you can debug through it as well. I have a debug a breakpoint in here. So you can step through it if that's what you wanted. You can just continue running. So you can run them all like that. And like I mentioned, like, we have this running as part of our CI as well. So right now, this is like your visual runner. And depending on if we were running it in CI, yes or no, we have a headless runner as well. So then it will just go through all of this and get the results in some kind of XML format that can be reported back to Azure DevOps, and you can inspect all the things with nice graphs that program managers like. So, we have all of that as well. You can just run it that way. Now, one hot topic, I guess, is show of hands, who uses App Center? Who's sad that it's going away? So here we have that thing. Oh, spoilers. No. Oh, so actually the Test Explorer is part of our amazing new stack for VS Code as well. I'm showing it here for like the UI tests because it's all kind of like built on the same principle. So if I would go to the unit test thing right here, you would see that it shows up here as well. So I've been using the command line to do .NET Test, but you can see it here in our Test Explorer as well, and run and debug and do all the things. So that works all just the same. So flipping over to another thing, I'm sorry, I have a couple of windows open here, so bear with me. So this is MAUI samples. For the ones who don't know what that is, we actually have a pretty cool repository. I don't have it here. MAUI samples, and I always land on my fork if that is, well, not like actually landing on a fork, but I have a fork repository of this, and it
Ouch.
always corrects me.
Ouch.
Yeah, I know. Just so people don't worry about me. And we have this big repository with all kinds of samples. There is actually a online browser for this as well, the samples browser, which is right here. And this is not just for .NET MAUI, it's for all kinds of things, but definitely also a lot, like 66 results for .NET MAUI. And what I uploaded here is the basic. Oh, I have to press return. No, not basic. No, it's not basic because it's super advanced. UI test, right? UI test, there we go. UI testing with Appium and NUnit. So the reason we use NUnit here is because we can upload some attachments and whatnot. We had reasons for it. So this is basically the exact same with all the README that you can see here in our repository as well. And this is like super cool because, not just because I wrote this, but this is all getting started for all the things that you can actually start running with this, with UI test based on Appium, where we had like Xamarin UI test before. But now we're transitioning to Appium also, again, on the .NET MAUI side. In our own code base, we're doing this. So if you want to see like how we're solving things, go dig into that repository and you can see it right there working. And this is kind of like a basic example that I put together and uploaded here for other people to see as well. So whenever you load kind of that up, it's a little bit like, because this is a repository with all kinds of samples, you have to go like into the 8.0 UI testing basic Appium NUnit sample. And then you have like the whole, well, it's multiple projects actually for this to actually work. This is the MAUI app, right? So that's your app under test. What was it called? System under test, SUT, that was it. And this is, again, basically your basic .NET MAUI app. If I would, like, I think I set this up. So if I run it again on my iOS emulator, hopefully it's the right one, then we will see probably, again, the old template because it's been a little while ago. And we just get our basic app. The one thing I did add in my main page right here is, see this note that we added the automation ID, because if you want to go through this, if you want to programmatically be able to reach certain controls, you will have to specify this automation ID, and then that is the name that you can actually specify to do like, hey, I want to now click this counter button and see if the increment still works, because that's the most important thing about our sample app. If increment doesn't work anymore, we can pack up, right? It just all pointless. So here you go, and incrementing still works, so that's good to know. I'll just remove this one for now. And we just have our basic app right here. But obviously, like if this is your app, super complex, rocket science, all the complex things are in here, add automations ID, and you can click like all the different things. And then what I did is I added a couple of different projects here that are going to help me with the UI tests. You could, so we still haven't really figured out. We're not really leaning one way or the other as the .NET MAUI team on like what is the best way. You could set this up as a single project as well. From a little bit of personal preference, I guess, I set it up as like multiple UI test projects, so that it's like super easy to also write platform-specific tests, and it's a little bit separated more. Especially in our case, we have like thousands of UI test files in there, so this divides it up a little bit. But either way is basically fine. And we still have a shared one, so all the kind of like tests that you can share, which should be like 99% most of the time, you can just write all your tests in the shared bits. But this also makes it easier a little bit to run it like for a specific platform as well. And then here you will have your like main test and main page test, right? So this is actually like follows the same pattern because it just uses NUnit, app launches, get a screenshot, which actually locally also shows up. So that's super cool. And the click counter test. So we're going to find that UI element, counter button, click, little delay for it to actually be processed so that it shows up on the screenshot. And then I'm going to assert that it actually says this thing. I have a base test to set some things up here, and the Appium server. So that's kind of like your most important thing. The way a lot of the UI tests, if not all the UI tests work, is like they have a little server running somewhere that sends all the instructions to the device that is actually testing, right? Works over HTTP, whatnot. Appium is no exception to that. So you will have to have this Appium server running. You can do that all yourself, but I decided I want to have these tests like run as autonomous as possible. So I want to have a little piece of code in here that will start up that Appium server for me, so that I also have control over like what address, what port, like we have a little base path in there, what it's supposed to use. And so I don't have to, in my CI pipeline or whatnot, have to also take care of like, hey, start the Appium server, make sure that the settings here and there align. So that's built in. If you don't want to use that, you can totally rip it out if that's what you want, but you can use it. There is one thing that's a little bit curious about the shared project. It uses the Microsoft build no targets, which is a little step up from like the SH proj, so like the shared project that we used to have, where you would just have a bunch of files that would be well, not copied, but it would be included in the other project. This actually at least shows up like as a separate project right here, and you can reference it decently. So, but it doesn't really produce a DLL. So the kind of like behavior is the same. And then for all the projects, for all the platforms, excuse me, we have kind of like a reference to the shared project, and that will just include like all the CS files, so all the tests and other classes that you might have in there. And here we have the ability to, have this little sample test, and here actually you write some platform specific code specifically for iOS or macOS or all the things. And then again, I will do it from the Test Explorer right now. You can see that Android and iOS show up right here. And I can just start running it from here. It will start building a little bit. And then it will pick up automatically because I have a little bit of configuration here in this Appium setup. No, sorry. Where is it? Appium setup, is that it? Oh, yeah, Appium setup. You have to specify like the options that you want to use for the test, right? Like automation name is always going to be the same for iOS and Android and whatnot. That's just the name of the automation driver that it's going to use. Platform name always going to be the same, but you want to use a different iOS version, specify it here. It will spawn up a iOS simulator with that version. The device name, obviously the app that you want to have on there. You can do all kinds of crazy things by installing the app through Appium as well, or just make sure that you have it deployed yourself in your CI pipeline, depending on what you want to do. And then it will start running through it. Did I already miss it? Was it gone? Yeah, I missed it. It was so fast. So yeah, that's how you can set up your UI tests.
Wow. That was a lot. That was cool.
Thank you.
I know you've been working on this with a bunch of people on the team for a while, but like, it's nice to see it all come to fruition. I mean,
yeah. So, and like I said a couple of times, like this is all stuff that we're using in a .NET MAUI code base as well. Obviously, this is like, your step from Xamarin UI test to Appium. The other obvious choice is then like, hey, question, sorry, is like, hey, can I run this? You can run this now on App Center. I think App Center has actually supported Appium as well. So maybe your tests are already Appium, but we've now partnered also with a company called Browser Stack. which we're working on samples as well, which is basically, before it was a competitor, but now we're partners, where you can run your UI tests also on physical devices, I think, in the cloud. And you can just say, hey, here's my Appium test. Here's what I want to run, and run it for me, please. So, you can do that. The samples are coming soon. I think we're planning blog posts, all kinds of things, because we're going through this just as you. So why not put that knowledge out there for you to use as well?
Sweet. All right. I know you have to pop over to the next of your 3 hours of live streaming. People switch to right now if they want to go see you, Shane, and Matt review some community PRs. The .NET Foundation YouTube or this YouTube?
It's this YouTube. Shall I pull up the link real quick or something? Yeah. I have all the powers.
Oh my goodness.
We're all in here as admins.
I don't know.
No, this was a lot of really good information from top to bottom today. This is a power-packed session.
Thanks. Yeah.
We've gotten lots of views too. Very cool.
Yeah. Popular on this. It's because we had YouTube celebrity Gerald on. I'm telling you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sure.
Cool. So yeah, so hang out at the .NET YouTube. I think the Twitch, we no longer stream to Twitch for the reviews, right? So, all right. Gerald dropped the link in the chat. Y'all know where to find me. I'm going to go hop over there and hang out in the chat after I refill my disgusting office coffee. It was
We're still live, Maddy. We're still live.
Can of seltzer. But then I'll be over there too. So just
all right.
Chat. Thanks for joining, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Happy April. We'll see you the first Thursday of May. I don't know what date that is yet, but figure it out. And yeah, let us know what you want to talk about. So see you later.
Yeah.
Bye.